Anime begins showing us a subject thirsty for power that wipes out a lot of goblins with their swords switching from one flat we're in a carriage that's ambushed by a horde of goblins, but warriors make their appearance to take care of that problem, and all of them they organize to exterminate each one of them. Later show us the city and warriors return to the city his victory, where one of them mentions that thanks to those goblins he was able to climb to level 6, and it's because there were a lot of, in addition to the fact that they amassed a good mutiny, then decide to go to the guild to collect it and share it among all of us. We see a young bandero who sees them walking and assume he could never do such a thing, plus it's a useless one that doesn't stop to blow his guts, and it's all because of his fault of that absurd ability which Gluttony calls gluttony, but at least he is grateful. We see that in the village the warriors see us coming to the holy knights, who are the 3 Blerick brothers named Ado Memel, and that of the Raffaele center. At that time a lord drops a piece of fruit on the ground and ends up kicking one of the, which makes him come closer to apologize, but is greeted by a kick. This man and woman to his side asks him if he doesn't know what he's doing. It happens if it offends a holy knight, since the punishment is to cut off his head. Details the middle knight he asks Jay and Memel to stop with, and he warns the poor man that do not repeat the warrior of before. When he sees it, he is horrified by that scene and wonders how it is possible that Lady Roxy is also a chivalry sacred. We are back with the bandit who is still laughing at the guts but decides to hold on because it's not long before the end of his shift. Then come the holy knights and Raffaele calls him to fate, asking him if he did his job by substituting for them. Then the young man replies to them yes. After listening to him, he throws some coins to the ground to give him his salary and he orders her to pick him up. But when he does, Raffaele beckons to Jado, and Jado he stomps Fate's hand, apologizing to he is so dirty that he had not seen, while Raffaele calls him pathetic because with so much noise it looks like they didn't feed him. Then Adio asks him if he intends to embarrass the Blicks by giving them a strong kick in the stomach, followed by how many more kicks. On the other hand, Memi he asks Fate who he thinks he is avows his livelihood, and that a guy with a skill as weak as yours is making money thanks to the benevolence from them, so you should to show gratitude. Is explained in that world like Latin America exists privileged and needy, and what the distinguishes are the special powers that bestow by the gods, i.e., the abilities. Finally, Raffaele tells her that if Olgasania makes a fool of his superiors and orders him to stand on his feet. But when he tries to do so he is stopped by the foot. Let it not stop, crush him with the ground. Raphael mentions that they'll have to give him and that the rebel dogs they need a strong hand in that. Same at that moment, another sacred knight appears, and he asks them to stop because they abuse as well as the citizenry to whom they have sworn protecting is not an act of the holy knights. They see that it's about Roxy Hart who follows them. Talkin' when you say watch the door, it is the honorable duty of a gentleman, and that duty is yours, even though Rafa replies that it is also the duty of they offer jobs to those in need. But Roxy asks him if he sees the need treat him in such a cruel way. Rafa he says it's just a difference professional opinion for later retire along with Jay and Memel. Once a Roxy comes over to extend that he hands Fate and asks if he's okay, but then he sees a little bit of a look threat from Raffaele at that time. By this time he is treated for his wounds by Roxy, and when she finishes she gives her the thank you for your help. She explains that they are fellow watchmen in addition to the fact that that's how a guy should act. Sacred Knight, and now it's the turn of she reveals it. Of course Fate responds quickly by handing over the banner of the flag, but then Roxy asks him that if something like this happens to him again, he won't hesitate to let him know. This leaves you without words for a moment, but then he replies that he doesn't worry and that he's used to it, so it ends withdrawing from there. At nightfall we see that Fate is remembering the words that she said to him, thinking of herself it really will be right to warn him, and they come to bother him again because even though she told him that, he doesn't know how Raffaele would react considering he tells us what he's like and doesn't want to get involved. The bartender asks the girl if he was beaten up again after seeing his wounds and warns him that if he continues so it's going to end like the previous abuses. Exploitation will only await you for a result, and it's a pretty ugly dream. Fate he decides not to tell him anything by giving him the thank you and pay for the food for then retreat through the bartender. He mentions he hopes that he doesn't end up like that again. Ruin guts to Fate who mentions that it's all the fault of his gluttony, thinking that I wish I had been born with a skill that he does something good for him, nor does he ask to be a holy knight. I'd settle for being a merchant warrior, or at least a craftsman who can't change things, cause when you Don't have nothing tramples you on their seas that a few subjects jump the wall to the where the castle is and thinks that they're thieves, then decide let Roxy know once he gets to her. Tell me what happened and you're sure, 'cause she saw it with her own eyes. Roxy decides to capture them and gives him the banner to take its place. In the meantime, he tells her not to worry about her because even if you don't, it seems like he's someone very skilled. Little after entering, Fate hears some shouts and several sword clashes, but when the sound stops, you wonder if it's all over. Suddenly see a wounded thief ran to him and from the fair tries to escape but stops at the end of the day. Remember that Roxy entrusted that banner and that if he runs away he will cause trouble for her, then it will. He tells himself he can't let escape by pointing your flag like a pretty dangerous spear this guy is, throws upon him whatever fate determined. He thinks he can do it by trying attacking him, also ends up burying him. The tip on your body causes a great wound as you go through it and leave it lying on the ground. After that hard experience realizes that it has moments later, something informs Fate that the gluttony skill and its being increased his tributes, plus he has new skills acquired, assessment, and telepathy. Fate is wondering if his ability gluttony was activated by being surprised by that and wonders that's what happened. Just after they ask if you are okay and if you are, he hurt, thinking he doesn't have good and he doesn't like that. He stays quiet hearing that last and he wonders in his head if that ends to hear from her were her thoughts, but when he came to his senses, replies that he is fine, though again he is confused when he hears again her thoughts. Roxy lets him know that he needs to report to her what happened to the superiors. He is surprised to realize that he no longer hears your thoughts. In the end he ends up answering that he's fine and that don't hesitate to take credit for that attack, even though she mentions to him that he was the one who defeated the subject by himself. Fate explains that if Rafala finds out that could get him in trouble, that is why I don't wants to get attention, thinking that he doesn't want to cause trouble for her. Yes, he ends up understanding his motives, but he clarifies that if it were not for him there would have been failed with his responsibility and he asks me to let him make up for it, that's why. After thinking about it for a while, it occurs to him something and asks Fate if he would like to work for the Hart family or if you intend to serve the BICs until send him to St. Peter's, and that he has nothing to worry about cause he decides his future. Fate sees that he can choose between a future where you are treated like trash to a radiant future in which he works for Roxy. Although she tells her that she does, whoever takes his place will end up the same as, but she reminds him to keep an eye on her door is a gentleman's duty and no matter what happens, it won't be. This ends up with convince Fate and ends up accepting his offer. Later he's left confused by reviewing your stats, notice that your attributes are above 100, wondering how it's possible and what it is. That evaluation and telepathy. Then he remembers that time when he heard the Roxy's thoughts and supposes that in that consists of telepathy. Also reminds that moment when his body warned him that the gluttony skill had been activated. Thinking about what happened to your body, but also think that with those attributes may be able to kill monsters. The next day go to the market, but he realizes that with the little money you have you can't buy any equipment or weapon. Remember that you came to the capital 5 years ago and that those 2 coins are the only thing he has been able to save by working the cellar. Well, he explains that the only thing he could do was to indulge in that money are guns that you've got in that barrel over there, and the Proto takes one when she sees that it's better. That is nothing, even if it suddenly activates its ability to evaluate, being able to see that that sword's endurance and strength is 0. Repeats the same with other swords and you see that they're the same, but when you take it from the back, he checks it better, noticing that she's disgusted and they've treated her like trash, and you suddenly look like him. He hears a voice out of nowhere and sticks a frightened, for it seemed to him that he heard the sword. When using his evaluation skill he sees that that sword has greed, and which is a one-handed sword, and at the moment he hears his voice again where the sword tells him that he will make it worth the asking him to buy it, even though he calls gluttony Fate and then tells her that the two have a lot in common. Then convinced of that, Fate ends up buying its special sword. Shows us that Memel informs Raffaele that Roxy he wants to hire Fate to work for the Hard, and without having given him permission to them, but he replies that there are plenty of substitutes for Fate and those who don't it's worth doing something about, and it will. He clarifies that the Har and the Badik form part of the 5 great families of the then they shouldn't be complicated anymore. Things then mention that he's going to go to the military district for investigation about being immortal, even though she takes it like a joke, and we're back with Fate, who he keeps talking with his sword and reacts swiftly before a goblin by killing it with an attack. This causes his ability to gluttony is reactivated by improving its attributes and giving him a new ability strength boost. Shortly after is surprised by a horde of goblins fighting with each one of them, and as it eliminates them, it goes away, activating gluttony's ability non-stop once you're done with everyone. Check that has more and better skills attributes and realizes thanks to the sword that is no longer hungry, though I believe that skills are something with what you are born, but the sword explains to you that this is due to his ability to gluttony. The attributes tend to go up after a fight, and depending on the experience gained, it will go up from level, but the skill steals tributes and cost as skills can't be achieved experience points. So that's why he is still level 1, and he knows that cause they're both on the same page. Although Fate doesn't understand that too, he clarifies that it is convenient for him that no one but let no one know of his ability gluttony, for it is one of the skills that challenges divine laws. Then Fate mentions that it's better to fight alone, though your sword remember that you have him and that now that he's her weapon won't be there again alone, and finally reminds him that he wear the ears of the goblins as so they'll be able to pay you after you do that. Go who have given him 3 pieces of silver and 8 bronze for killing 38 goblins, enough for meat dinner. On the way, he bumps into a guy something aggressive that has a girl grabbed, and she touches the Fate makes you their cry for help can be heard in their thoughts, seeing that activates your ability to assess the attributes of that kind. But his sword, he says that guy must have camouflage and he hides his abilities even with review so they can't see from what he's capable of. Still decides follow it by showing yourself that that man he's got the girl tied up, letting him know that will be a toy for the night sacred. At that moment Fate is hiding, thinking that if you see someone in distress, you can't sit idly by. Cross